Good afternoon. My name is Brian Almon. I publish at gemstate.substack.com and a few other places as well. So you'll see me out and about throughout the internet. I just published a piece last night, or it published this morning, with my quick thoughts on the FBI raid on President Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. So I invite you to go check that out over at gemstate.substack.com. But I wanted to elaborate on a few things and just kind of have some stream of consciousness here. So one thing I'm noticing, there's two reactions going on in the right-wing social media sphere in reaction to this raid. You have some people who are fired up, who are ready to just tear the FBI apart, and who are really starting to talk about this being the end of an era in American history. And we'll get to that in a minute because that is my reaction. That is where I feel. But there's another group of who we would call maybe the more moderate Republicans, the never Trump Republicans, the establishment Republicans, whatever you want to say for this group that never really bought into the idea of MAGA or Donald Trump or America First. And their reaction has been more restrained, I guess. You have Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina saying that we need to let this play out. We need to wait for all the facts. And you have others, pundits. Ben Shapiro is kind of waffling on this. He's trying to say this is a bad thing, that the Department of Justice has been weaponized, but also let's let it play out. Let's wait for the full story. David French and Jonah Goldberg, who I wouldn't even call them conservatives anymore. They pretended to be conservatives for a long time because that's how they're, that's where they found readership and support. They're saying the same thing. They're going along with the leftists who are saying, well, the FBI would never have made this raid if they didn't have hard evidence of some wrongdoing, and nobody's above the law, not even former and possibly future presidents. Because you see, that's really what the whole point of this is. This is fear that Trump is going to run in 2024 and completely upset the establishment globalist apple cart. He tried in 2016 and did enough that they're running scared now. And who knows what would happen if he was in power again. Would anything that restrained him the first term, would it be gone? Remember, Trump in 2016 was saying that he was going to put Hillary Clinton in jail. And for a lot of us, that sounded great because that would have shown that nobody was above the law. However, once in office, he stepped back. He did not actively prosecute her or anyone in her circle who clearly had broken laws. And even his attempt to look into Joe and Hunter Biden's dealings in Ukraine was met with his first impeachment trial. So there was a lot of resistance once he was actually in power to doing the things he had told us he was going to do. On the other hand, now that the Democrats are back in power in a post-Trump era, they have no such qualms. There's nothing stopping them from utilizing the Department of Justice, the FBI, the CIA, the IRS to go after their political opponents. So the reaction of people like Tim Scott or David French, I'm not even sure you can call it in good faith. Because after 6 years of watching the Department of Justice be weaponized against enemies of the regime, you had these FISA warrants that are supposed to be so hard to get, yet they were gotten through basically fraud to spy on the Trump campaign. And you had, the Department of Justice mobilized against the sitting president as well. James Comey of the FBI admitted that they were, they were investigating him, that they were, coming after him. That's why he fired him. And then you had the Mueller investigation, which spent 2 years and a lot of taxpayer dollars trying to find hard evidence that Trump had colluded with Russia to steal the election. And they found nothing. although they did manage to keep it going long enough into the 2018 midterms that it was an elections issue and basically helped the Democrats regain control of the House that year. So to look back at the last 6-7 years and say, well, we're just going to let this play out. We're going to see what happens. I want to wait until all the facts are out there. Come on, man. It's obvious what's going on. The Democrat regime has completely weaponized federal agencies to use against their opponents. And we've been seeing it for the last year and a half. After January 6th, I said at the time, this is their Reichstag fire. If you remember from history, shortly after Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, suddenly there's a fire that burns down their parliament building. It's as if somebody had burned down our U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. And Hitler says it was communist agents. Now, it may well have been. I've read differing views on whether or not it was actually communist agents that burned down the Reichstag. But that wasn't the point. It didn't matter who actually did it. What mattered is that now Hitler had an excuse to seize basically absolute power in the name of protecting the country, protecting German democracy, you might say. He pushed through some laws that gave him emergency powers, and he never relinquished them until the end of the war, and he was dead, and Germany was dead with him. I said at the time, and after January 6th, that the Democrats were going to do the same thing. They're going to blow this unauthorized tour of the Capitol on the 6th into, this gargantuan insurrection. Remember, the reason they're using the word insurrection is specifically to try and bar certain people from office. The 14th Amendment was passed after the Civil War, and there was a clause in there that prevented people who had engaged in insurrection against the United States from holding high office. The idea was to keep former Confederate officials and generals out of office. But they're using that word now because they're going to try and keep people like Donald Trump or Marjorie Taylor Greene or Paul Gosar or Thomas Massie from holding office. So they've actually tried and failed to use that excuse to keep Marjorie Taylor Greene off the ballot in Georgia. But they're not done. They're going to keep trying. And so everything since they've come into power in January 2021, has been about turning our government against half the country. They're trying to criminalize being a conservative. They're trying to criminalize being a Trump supporter. They're trying to criminalize the existence of Donald Trump. Now, like I said in my piece, I've seen a lot of arguments back and forth as to who we should support in 2024. Should it be Trump again? Should we support someone new like Ron DeSantis? I think this raid is evidence that Trump should be our candidate, if only because he is the one who strikes fear into the heart of the left and the deep state more than anyone else. Okay. I think Ron DeSantis will be a good leader someday. I like what he's done so far. I'd like to see more. But right now, Trump is the one who has them in existential fear, so much that they are turning America into a communist-style dictatorship basically overnight in order to stop him. So if he's the one that scares them so much, then yeah, let's keep pushing him as far as he'll go. The thing with these pundits and politicians and people on the right who are trying to pretend that this is all normal, they don't know what time it is. They look around the state of our country now and they think that this is just a minor speed bump. This is just a minor aberration in our history, that all we have to do is get rid of this Trump guy and everything's going to go back to normal, whatever normal is. I think some Republicans think that we need to go back to 2014 before Trump came on the scene. Yeah, we had Obama as president in there, radically transforming our country, but we could still, we could still have conversations, right? We could still agree to disagree. Some people want to go back before Obama to the Bush years. Others want to go back further to the 1980s when Reagan was in power and everything seemed to be okay. Conservatives love to look back to Ronald Reagan and Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill. They're from opposite parties, but they were still, able to get along and work together. Why can't we go back to that? Or maybe even further, go back before that whole social unrest of the 60s. Go back to the 50s. We've just won the war. We're in good shape. Eisenhower's president. Anyway, people want to go back to some normalcy, but civilized countries don't come back from having gone this far. There's no going back from, this brink that we're at. The only way forward is forward. And it's going to be a future that is defined by the left, the ones who are raiding the former president's home right now, or it's going to be defined by us. But either way, the genie's out of the bottle, the toothpaste is out of the tube. We've crossed a threshold, and we have to deal with the way things are now, not the way things we wish they were. And people like Tim Scott and Ben Shapiro and Jonah Goldberg, I think they don't get that. And I briefly mentioned in my piece this morning, I think this is one of the most important dividing lines between people within the Republican Party right now. You have those who think that we are just one candidate or one issue away from going back to normal, and they want to put things back the way they are. And you see that with most of the establishment. They just want to go along to get along. They want to avoid the controversial issues. They want to, run on tax cuts and regulation cuts and high employment and forget all these things that are tearing the country apart. Let's just, close our ears and close our eyes and pretend that it's not actually happening. And then there are those of us who say, wait a second, our country is falling apart. And if we don't do something radical, then we're going to end up in civil war or a communist dictatorship or worse. And then they look at us and say, no, we're the extremists because we're proposing these radical solutions. And one of those radical solutions I think that we need to get more people talking about is completely eliminating the FBI. It is clear that it has become an arm of the Democratic Party. It has been for a long time. It's just becoming more overt now. I'm seeing a lot of people starting to say this that weren't saying it before. Cassandra Owens on Twitter was saying we need to abolish the FBI. Congressman Paul Gosar of Arizona, State Representative Anthony Sabatini of Florida, who hopefully will be a congressman from Florida after the November elections, he's saying the same thing. We need to just get rid of the FBI. Jesse Kelly, I was just listening to his show from last night where he found out in the middle of the show that this raid was happening. And so he went on a long rant about it. He's been warning of, the radical state of our country for a while. And he said he wants to see the FBI scattered, broken into 10,000 pieces and scattered to the wind. That's allegedly what John F. Kennedy said about the CIA shortly before he got shot. What this makes me think the most of, and what I've been thinking about since January 6th, is Roman history. There are so many parallels between America and Rome. We don't need to rehash them all. But in the late years of the Roman Republic, there were these two leaders who kept going back and forth, trading power back and forth, and they were the leaders of opposite parties. You had Gaius Marius. He's the reformer. He's the populist. He's trying to change Rome to be more equitable to the people, trying to bring it into the modern era. You have Lucius Sulla, who is he would be the conservative in the story. He wants to keep things the way they are. He wants to go back. He doesn't want these changes. And they keep going back and forth. They keep, one of them gets elected and then he issues proscriptions, basically death sentences for the supporters of his opponent. And then the other one gets elected and anyone who survives are now in power and they go after the other side. And they go back and forth. And they have some bloody civil wars. Now, the idea that Sulla had was that if he just seized absolute power, he could put things back the way they were. By the time he seized power for the last time, Marius was dead. His supporters were in disarray. He marches on Rome with an army, gets himself appointed dictator for life by the Senate. Dictator was actually a Roman office. The Senate would appoint a Roman leader as a dictator who could cut through the red tape, do what needs to be done, solve the problem, fix the crisis, and then ideally would then give up his dictatorship and go back to whatever his day job was. The Platonic example of that was Cincinnatus. He became dictator, he defeated the invaders, and then he went back to his farm. George Washington was called the American Cincinnatus for having the strength of character to give up absolute power, not once but twice in his life, after he was the victorious general in the Revolution and then after he had been president for 2 terms. Both times he decided to go back home to Mount Vernon. Anyway, so the Senate makes Sulla, dictator for life. And he goes through and he just gets rid of all the remaining supporters of Marius, except for one young teenage Julius Caesar who escapes. And then after putting everything back, he goes and retires to his farm and lives the rest of his life in apparently hedonistic luxury. He dies thinking he's saved the Roman Republic. But that young man he failed to kill, Julius Caesar, will eventually come back, and under his leadership, Rome would be transformed once and for all from the Republic into the Empire. So as I watch the Democrats weaponizing the Department of Justice, using the FBI to raid the former and possibly future president's private home for no real reason, you know that. There's no, they spent years on the Mueller investigation. They have nothing on him, but they will keep using the power they have to go after him and after us. Trump was right when he says that the only reason they're going after him is because they're coming after us. As I watch this, I am reminded of those, days in history over 2,000 years ago. History tells us that there's no coming back from this brink. That the further we go, every threshold we cross, the more and more unlikely it is that we're ever going to go back. And that's just the way of things. We have short attention spans. We have short lifespans. People of my generation look back on the 90s with nostalgia. People of my grandparents' generation look back on the 50s with nostalgia. And that's always the way it is. But there's never any going back. The revolution changed the American nation into something new, a new country. The Civil War changed America forever. Our participation in the World Wars and the Great Depression, the New Deal, the Great Society, the Immigration Act of 1965, all these things change America, and we become something new. And so the task for conservatives is to articulate a vision for what we want America to be, and then use every lever at our disposal to make it happen. So, yeah, I don't really have any conclusion except for that. It's just we go forward. People like Tim Scott, we have to just stop paying attention to them. We have to vote these people out. They don't understand the gravity of the situation. We need to put in people who, are not necessarily ready to burn the whole country down, but who are willing to take radical steps to do what is necessary to save our country. And by our country, I don't mean, the land or the government. I mean the people. The people are what makes America America. It's not necessarily our laws. It's not necessarily our documents or our monuments or our buildings. It's not our specific borders. It's the people. And any conservative vision for what America can be, how to save America, has to be focused on the people, not the external trappings. So, well, I appreciate those who are watching. Remember to find my work at gemstate.substack.com. You can find me on Twitter at gemstatebrian. And yeah, we keep going forward. So I appreciate your time. I will talk to you again soon. God bless you.